Okay, so the new grammar point that we're going to introduce in this chapter is actually one that we have talked about a little bit before. We're going to talk about verbs that show existence. So in the previous chapter, when I introduced the new verbs, we talked about two different verbs that show that something exists. あります and います. So both of them have a meaning like there is something, there are something. We don't have an exact equivalence to this in English, but they're verbs that show that something exists, like there is something in a place, or there are something in a place. As you may remember, the difference between these two verbs is that あります is used for inanimate objects only, whereas います is used for things that are animate. So in other words, it's used for animals and people. So both have a meaning like there is something, there are something. We might also translate them as to have something sometimes, in the sense of like, I have a book, I have a sister, I have a cat, I have a friend. We also sometimes see います in the sense of like to be in a place, as in like if somebody asked you what you're doing on the weekend and you're just going to stay at home, you might say うちにいます. I will be in my house. I will exist in my house. So to put it really simply, あります is to exist for inanimate things, and います to exist for people and animals. So I want to take a minute to clarify because I think some people have difficulty telling apart these concepts. So we have this あります and います that we are learning in this chapter, and we also have the です, our magic word that we studied back in chapter 1. Now in English, we only have one verb that means to be. We say that I am a teacher, someone is a teacher, and we also say I am over here. Someone is over here. There is a book over here. But in Japanese, we have slightly different ways of saying those things. So, あります and います means that something exists. In other words, there is something. There are some things. Whereas です shows us that, like, something is something else. X is Y. So, like, for example, Shimizu sensei is a teacher, or Tanaka-san is tall. So, あります います means there is, there are, whereas です means like I am something, you are something, he is something, she is something. So, it might help to look at two comparative sentences to contrast. So, 学生がいます means like there is a student or there are students. So for example, there's a student over there. There's a student in the classroom. There are students in the university. Whereas 学生です, depending on who the subject of the sentence is, means I am a student. He is a student. They are students. So 学生です is telling us about what the people are. 学生がいます is telling us that there are people there. The same is true for like 本があります. So 本があります means there is a book or there are books. So there's a book on that table. There's a book on the shelf. There are books in the library. 本です is just a statement of fact about something. This is a book. That is a book. So somebody asked me, hey, what is that thing? It's a book. That's how 本です works. So あります telling you about something that exists, です telling you what something is. So let's take a look at some sentences where we can use あります or います. So this is a town. 日本語で町. We call it 町. この町に公園があります. So 町, a town. 公園, a park. この町に公園があります. Let's take a look. Let's zoom in on the 公園 a little closer. 公園に猫がいます. 公園に猫がいます. So in the park, there is a cat. So in the town, there is a park. In the park, there is a cat. この町に公園があります. 公園に猫がいます. So when we are making sentences about how there is something in a place, or there is someone in a place, we use first the place plus ni something ga arimasu or imasu. So we have to choose our existence verb based on what thing we're saying exists. So a park is not a person or animal, right? So we use arimasu. But a cat is an animal. So we want to use imasu. So in other words, there is something, there are something in a location. Ni, in this case, is showing like where something exists. So when we use arimasu or imasu, we use ni to mark the place where it exists. And ga shows the subject. So we use the particle ga to mark what exists. So once again, location ni item ga arimasu, imasu. So Union ni Starbucks ga arimasu. So in the student union ni Starbucks ga a Starbucks arimasu. It exists. うちに猫がいます. So our location, うちに, in our house, 猫, a cat, がいます. So we start with our location plus ni, union ni, うちに, and then the item, Starbucks が猫が, and then our verb, あります, います. How about if we want to ask a question? For a yes or no question, it's just as straightforward as it always has been. All we have to do is put ka on the end. So, Union ni Starbucks ga arimasu ka? Is there a Starbucks in the student union? We can answer with hai arimasu if there is, or iie arimasen if there's not. How about this case? うちに猫がいますか? Once again, all we have to do to mark the question is add on the particle ka. So if there is a cat, we can say はいいます. If there isn't, いいえいません. Now, what if we want to ask what is in a place or who is in a place? We will start with the same format of sentence. So, location ni something ga arimasu or imasu. But in this case, instead of putting the name of the item, we're going to put a question word. So what question word can I use if I want to ask what is in a place? That's right, I want to use the question word nani. Nani. What can I use if I want to ask who is in a place? Exactly, I want to use dare. Dare meaning who. So, for example, I can have a regular sentence. デパートにカバンがあります. If I want to make this into a question, what is at the department store? I can get rid of kaban and replace it with nani. Sorry, it got a little bit cut off. Nani ga arimasu, and then the ending, ka. How about if I want to ask? So I have a sentence. バス停に人がいます. What if I want to ask who is at the bus stop? バス停に誰が, sorry, it's a little bit cut off. 誰がいますか? So who is at the bus stop? These are people, right? So I don't want to ask about them with what. They're not what's, they're who's, right? So let's make sure to use dare when we're talking about people. Okay, one more thing I want to say about arimasu today. We can also use arimasu to talk about things that are not physical objects. For example, we can use it to talk about our schedule. So, if I want to say on Wednesday, 水曜日, I have English class, I can use あります to talk about that. 水曜日に英語のクラスがあります. So on Wednesday, I have English class. Or 11時に日本語のクラスがあります. 11時 at 11 o'clock, I have Japanese class, or there is Japanese class. So time に event があります. So let's take a look at some examples. So we can make our structure like time に, or if it's one of the ones that doesn't take に, then we can leave the に out. Like, so for example, if it's 今日 or 明日, 昨日, 来週, all of those ones that are not times on a calendar or a clock. So our time plus に, if we need to have it, event があります. So 火曜日に on Tuesday, アルバイトがあります. I have my part-time job. Or we can ask a question. 水曜日に on Wednesday, 何がありますか? So on Wednesday, what is there? What event is there? This is a way we can use to talk about our schedule. Okay, so that's it for the information about あります, います for this chapter. See if you can use them and the particles that we talked about in this video to complete the following activities.